Welcome to the Fire Sprinkler Podcast with Chris and Logan. This episode of the Fire Sprinkler Podcast is brought to you by AGF Manufacturing. For over 30 years, AGF has designed and manufactured unique fire sprinkler products, including anti-freezing drum drips, automatic air venting valves, and corrosion monitors. These products accommodate the varying demands of the fire protection industry and help manage fire sprinkler systems more efficiently. AGF continually works with engineers and contractors in the field to improve existing products to deliver innovative, reliable, and code-compliant fire protection products for the commercial and residential sprinkler systems worldwide. AGF's product line includes Collect and Drain, Core and Sight, Purge and Vent, Test and Drain, Remote Test, Inspector's Test, Test and Save, and Riser Pack. For additional information about AGF's products or to find a distributor in your area, please visit agfmanufacturing.com. Hey everybody, on this episode of the Fire Sprinkler Podcast, I speak with Jim McHugh. Jim is the president of AGF Manufacturing. AGF Manufacturing has a lot of different products out there for fire sprinkler, kind of things to add-ons to the sprinkler systems like the Collect and Drain, Purge and Vent, Test and Drain, Remote Test, Test and Save, Inspector's Test, just to list a few of them. They got a lot of products. Check out agfmanufacturing.com to see all the stuff that they have. We kind of go off on a little bit of a tangent. I'm not going to speak too much about what the interview entails here because we got talking about sprinkler and kind of lost track of time. This one, I believe, just the interview is over an hour, substantially over an hour. So without further ado, here is my interview with Jim McHugh from AGF Manufacturing. Hey everybody, thanks for tuning into this episode of the Fire Sprinkler Podcast. On this episode, I have Jim from AGF. Jim is the president of AGF, that's correct?
Yes.
Okay, and why don't you start things off by telling me a little bit about AGF's history and what you guys do for the industry?
Well, first, Chris, thank you very much for having me on the podcast. And so my family has been involved directly in the fire protection market with automatic fire sprinkler products since the mid-'80s. My father, George McHugh, introduced the industry's first test and drain valve back in the mid-'80s. Mm-hmm. And that valve came out of his work with a small company here in Philadelphia. And in my dad's prior history, he was involved with other valve companies and had one of the ones that a lot of people in the industry know about is the Butterball valve by Milwaukee. My dad was involved in the creating of that valve, and then in his retirement, was brought out of retirement to work for the sprinkler company. And that's when he saw the old 17 pipe connection of doing the inspector's test and express drain connections. And he thought that there was no reason to put 17 pieces together when it could be accomplished by one three-way ball valve.
There must be a better way.
And it's truly that. I think evolutionary as our company and our family, we tend to work directly with a lot of contractors in the field to get their feedback on what are they doing, how are they doing things, and how can we make their life simpler. And we're very much a products-oriented company where we look at when someone is putting together 2, 3, 4, 5 different items, can we streamline that process and try and make it more efficient and make it into a single product?
Right. Okay. So I'm on your website right now. I'm at testanddrain.com, which I think might be a sublink into your website. What is the actual website if people want a little bit of information about your products?
Well, ironically, that is the one that over the years has been the most popular one, the testanddrain.com, and with one D. But agfmanufacturing.com, and you'll see great similarities between the two of them. And we try and show a variety of different product lines, from the valve side of us, which is the test and drain side that many people know about, and that can incorporate multiple versions of valves like our remote test. Not a lot of people know about the remote test, but that's actually a very popular product. The Riser Pack product line, you get into some of the newer items where you have our collect and drain and our core insight and our purge and vent product lines.
So actually, the one that I had just stumbled upon here as we were talking is the remote test. Um, can we talk a little bit about the remote test and how'd you guys come up with this idea and why did you come up with this idea?
It was ironic. We had gotten a call from a contractor who was doing a job at a state prison, and he had
Okay.
said that the test and drain valves, long-term user of test and drain valves, but the valves themselves, by the way they had laid out the system, the valves were going to be located directly above prison cells. And he asked us, he was calling and said, have we ever come up with a way of doing this so that the valve could still be fully functional, it'd still be a full code compliant valve, but could we also automate it? So we sat down, and this was actually, my father was still alive at this point, and he came up with the idea of adding a solenoid valve to our end adapter. And we were able to accomplish two functions. The valve still acted as, when the valve is in the off position, the test orifice allows the water flow to go to the end adapter, so that you still had a manual valve that could be manually operated as an inspector's test as well as an express drain. But you had this third feature that when wired back to a panel, it could be remotely activated. And we thought it was just a fun idea to tinker with for this one contractor. And I think that contractor in turn told other people. And we started to get unique calls where we had another person call, and I can't believe somebody actually did a layout for this, but I'm sure the fitters that listen would agree. We had someone put an inspector's test above a pool.
Oh,
and how
that's
they
good
ever
stuff.
thought, how they ever thought somebody was going to be able to get to that. I would say the remote test it splits its application into two places. We tend to get last minute phone calls going, hey, they want to put it in an inconvenient location, like above a cloud, or they want to put it behind a block of mechanical equipment, and they know that inaccessibility is going to be a detriment to using the product. So they know they can add the remote test feature. And then we have that market then also catered to the college market, the college and large corporate campus, but a school like Penn State University, they adopted the reuse of the remote test because they could have all of the test and drains on the campus all remote back to a panel, so that under quiet alarm in the middle of the night, they could do system testing.
Really?
And then they are actually one of the largest, and the college market in general, they are probably the largest market for us for the remote test, because they tend to own their buildings for long periods of time, and they tend to stay as code compliant to current code as possible. They're very aggressive in their diligence, and the remote test made it easier for them.
So NFPA, I believe they've been talking about introducing requirements for remote testing. So are you aware of any of the requirements for remote testing right now? And did you guys kind of initiate that change to the NFPA 25, or was it something coming that they wanted to be prepared for it, but they just didn't know how anybody was going to do it yet? What was the kind of situation, order of events that happened there?
I don't know that say we initiated it. We kind of stay on top of it. It started 3 code cycles ago that they submitted language in NFPA 13 for the automated testing devices. And there was a placeholder put in the 2010 code, and there was finally language, and that has evolved each edition from 2013, 2016, and even greater now in 2019, where they are moving multiple components of our industry. And it could incorporate the inspector's test valve being automated to the diesel fire pumps being automated testing. There are versions of alarm valves. The alarm valves themselves are self-testing.
Really?
The recent changes to NFPA 25 tend to follow as 13 is being adopted. It then mandates that 25 be updated to respond to what is being required in 13. So that language is the NFPA 25 is just starting to say, flesh out their automated testing device area. But I think ultimately the goal in the industry is to move to more automation and move to and it was ironic. I understand the ultimate goal of what they want to do, but I also am a company that manufactures inspectors test valves, and I have been somewhat of a opponent, not a proponent. I've been opponent to the fully automatic testing of systems. I think there was actually some submitted language to both 13 and 25 that if you could automatically test components, you would no longer be required to have the manual ability. And I was absolutely opposed to that idea. And I know the compromise that they went with was and I can't remember the specific component, but every third time in a required cycle, a product must be manually tested.
Right.
Because
that makes sense. Yeah.
To me, there's too much of a chance if our industry moves too fast to the fully automatic methodology, I think it's detrimental we're putting too much reliance on the electronics sides of system. We are a mechanical system. There are human mechanical interaction is required. There has to be a brain to make some wise decisions on why things are like they are. I understand the efficiency side of automatic testing, but I think it's also very important that there be a person there to make good evaluating decisions.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons why I think water motor gong should be still required on all wet systems and dry systems. Kind of been going the opposite way where they're going to more electrical alarms, but I still think water motor gong is a mechanical alarm system that's fail-proof. If power goes out for an extended period of time, you lose the batteries in the panel, anything like that, you're always going to have some way of notifying people that system's gone off.
Yeah, it's amazing to me that people equate the fire sprinkler system's complexity to, say, HVAC. The issue I've got is no one has an expectation that their HVAC system will have little to no maintenance, and it will be the same situation for 50 plus years.
Right. Yeah. And then get their minds blown when they get a bill for 20 grand to replace, or, 10, 15 grand that, got to do an overhaul on it. Well, care and maintenance is cheaper overall, but the problem is, and I've been saying it a lot lately, is there's no return on investment in fire protection until you have a fire. You're paying for maintenance, you're paying for installation. It's always an expense. Until you have a fire, and then people are super happy to see the sprinkler guy show up.
There was just there was just a fire, and I'm paraphrasing it best, but there was a fire in Arizona. I think it may have been in the Scottsdale area, and they interviewed the homeowner, and the dad said, I remember commenting how ugly the sprinkler was, but the fact that the fire just saved my 2 babies. It's now the prettiest thing in my house.
That was December. Back in December.
I just think that alone, and I think what we're starting to see, and this is again my opinion. One of the things that always, here in Philadelphia, we're a major city, and almost every newscast has something about a fire. So, a fire in a house downtown, a fire in an apartment building, a fire in a single-family home. We don't get enough publicity out there, and I think it's just starting. Like Jeff Norton from Vikings got a great website for sprinkler saves, and the various associations are putting out sprinkler saves, and I think that's something that I wish we could get more media attention on, is the actual time that these devices, these life safety systems, save lives.
Yeah, exactly. And there was a big one in the news at the Fire Sprinkler podcast. I don't like to shed light on the negative things that happen, the fatalities from fires, where fire chiefs are saying in interviews that sprinklers could have prevented this. But there was a major one out in Nova Scotia just last week where seven young children were killed in a residential fire, and now they're talking about introducing it into the building code for all new builds, and it's already getting pushed back from the builders and stuff like that. But I mean, it's hard to say no to something that, with they say the stat is 80% increase your chances of getting out of a burning building by 80%. But I mean, if you look at the amount of buildings that are sprinklered and the amount of sprinkler saves that happen, excuse me, and the the fatalities in these buildings is next to nothing. Like you get the situation that happened in Scottsdale, Arizona, years and years ago, where it was arson. Somebody came in, poured gas on the victim in the home, poured gas in the house, and lit a match. That person lived. The sprinklers went off.
Yeah.
The house still burned. It was a fuel fired fire, but the fact that people don't die, and I don't think that people understand it, right? The big thing we got to get through is Hollywood, and getting the statistics out there for Hollywood, where somebody doesn't pull a pull station in a building and the sprinklers go off, or things like that, right? People see it as introducing another way to damage their home if something happens, right? So
I had the unique instance that when I sold my first home, which was fully sprinkled, the family that had 3 young children, as well as I
yep.
had young children, but prior to me occupying the house, I retrofitted a residential system throughout the whole house. And when I sold the house, the people that bought it from me demanded I drain and disable the sprinkler system because the new homeowner was worried about one of their Oriental rugs getting wet.
Well, it won't get damaged if it catches on fire, but getting it wet will kill it.
But it was amazing. They held up settlement until I drained, and I made them sign, of course, a liability release.
Absolutely, yeah.
And we had 2 other homes in our development burned down.
Really?
And I was dumbfounded. To this day, I shake my head at that.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, new rules and regulations are essentially written in blood. It's unfortunate, but I mean, you can't even say that, we just need, one fatality in a fire, because they happen every day. So it's a matter of everybody kind of collectively getting together and knowing the facts on sprinklers before any major change happens. And the problem with, I mean, I'm Canadian, so the problem with the Canadian building code and excuse me, specifically the Ontario fire code, or building code, which is where I'm located, is even though there's revisions every 4 to 6 years, those revisions don't get rolled out municipality to municipality immediately upon release. So even if they release requirements of residential sprinklers in the 2000 and I think it's 2020 or 22 building code, it's not going to be in place until 2029, 2027, somewhere in that area, right? So
yeah.
It's a slow process, and it's not saying that the fight's not worth it, because as soon as, anybody who's been to a building or a service call for the fitters out there, or gotten the word back from the designers that have designed a building that has put out a fire, I'm only 30 years old. I've been designing for 6 or 7 years now. I've had one of the buildings that I designed in my family business had a fire. Yeah, I think I've told the story on the podcast before, but the building maintenance man called us up. It was a long-term care facility, retirement home that we had retrofitted. Got a call on a Friday afternoon. One of your sprinklers went off. You were giving me all the statistics, blah, blah, blah. 1 in 16 million chance that it's going to go off. He was pissed. He was very upset that there was water pouring out of one of his mechanical rooms. So, called one of the guys. The guy went over there. It was my brother went over there to kind of talk the guy off a cliff. Fire department met him at the door, shook his hand, essentially gave him a hug. Hot water tank that was in the closet had caught fire. Being a fuel fired appliance in a closet, we had sprinklered that closet. The sprinkler activated and knocked the fire down to the point where when the maintenance guy got there to see what was happening, he didn't see the burns on the back of on the other side of the hot water tank.
Wow.
So yeah, so essentially a wood construction building, combustible construction, 13-hour install. Everybody slept in their beds that night.
If you want to me to know, there's a great website called fireadvocates.org, and it's an organization called Common Voices. And I highly recommend, if you ever get the opportunity to have someone from Common Voices on your podcast, their stories will change your life, because they are a group of individuals who have had extreme fire-related injuries. So these could be like the one gentleman, it was in the Station nightclub fire in Rhode Island. So lost his fiance and had severe burns. Other people were burned as children or as adults, and these individuals are specifically extremely motivated because of their physical, the impact fire had on themselves and their lives, and how I think the one person had 150 surgeries. They've become very big sprinkler advocates, and I think that's what a lot of times, and I'm friendly with many other manufacturers in our industry, and one of the driving forces that I think a lot of the manufacturers and the contractors, the fitters in the field, the engineers, we have to step back and look at, we are involved in a life safety device, and we have to take a sense of pride. It has to be looked at from, we're manufacturing products, we're designing systems, we're installing products that are going to save lives, but they're having an impact that could change lives. And I don't think people realize that. And we're a family business. We've always prided ourselves. We're like you. We're a multi-generational family business. And besides family business, we're also, I would say, even in nepotism. I mean, a significant portion of our employee base grew up with my family, went to grade school with my family, went to high school, went to college. We all realize that there's a bigger mission. So
and that's that's a good thing about the industry as well. Like I said, I'm 30 years old. I'm still fairly young in the industry, but going to the conferences and stuff like that I've had the opportunity to go to, it's not what you would expect by the big manufacturers. Everybody, they're obviously competitive with each other, but at the same time, everybody's got a common goal in this industry, and it's to reduce fatalities and loss due to fire. So it's good to see everybody kind of, like I said, there's a big competition with everybody getting the latest and the greatest products out there, but at the same time, everybody wants to see the same end result, and it's good to see it, not as competitive and cutthroat out there, as more of a, let's do what we can.
Yeah, very much so.
Okay, so let's get back to AGF here and talk a little bit more about the stuff that you guys have. We went off on a little tangent there, which is good. So we talked about the test and drain. Let's get into the collect and drain. The auxiliary drains, which is requirements for dry systems, anywhere that you have a dry system, pre-action dry system with trapped water that accumulates. What is the principle and the idea behind the collect and drain?
That came out, again, we were looking, as we saw the problems that antifreeze were having. And, thankfully that's being somewhat resolved, but we knew dry systems were being installed more and more around North America, or actually around the world. And that the more we spoke to contractors that were putting in dry systems, everybody kind of rolls their eyes with dry systems because, they inherently require more installation time, more sophisticated design, more products, between the air compressors and air maintenance devices and dealing with the system. But that's only half of the story, is getting the system in. There is a significant expense on dry systems that's told after the systems are in. It's the long-term care and maintenance of dry systems that are really a significant expense, far greater than what the installation expense is. And when we went and talked to ITM contractors, we said, well, again, tell us, what are you doing with them? How are you interacting with them? What do you like about them? What do you not like about them? What's the problem points? One of the most universal answers we got was, people don't do enough preventative maintenance on dry systems. They don't go around and check the low point drains, or somebody tampers with a product on the systems, or someone forgets where the low point drains are, or it kept going back to people just not doing enough preventative maintenance. And when we after we talked to dozens of contractors, the kind of main themes we got were figure out how to tell us where and which low point drains have water in it, and prevent somebody from either accidentally, because they have no idea what the product is and how it works, accidentally tripping the dry valve, or, which I didn't think it was possible, that people vandalize and tamper with the valve. So we focused first on like our model 5100 ALBV. It's a really simple ball valve that will chirp and blink and tell you which specific low point drain has water in it, so you can target that one for draining. And it sounds so simplistic, but ultimately it came out of the fact that, and not a lot of people realize that there is specific language in NFPA 13 that all low point drains are to be mapped out, and a copy of that is supposed to be at every dry valve. Mm-hmm. And in my career, I have never seen that. I have never seen and maybe you have, but I have never seen a map of all low point drains attached to a specific dry valve.
No, you're lucky to get even a quantity. If you take over a new building, you're lucky to get a quantity of low points and drains on the hanging on the tag on the riser. Yeah.
and it's always, so there's that, the one guy, Bob, is the only one who actually knows where all the valves are.
Yep.
And unfortunately, Bob happened to be on vacation, and he has no idea to go around and drain them. So the idea was, could we make a product, and we're on the equivalent of probably generation 3 of it. Again, different contractors in the field that had heard about the product, installed the product, then came back with recommendations. And like a perfect example, we had people that were putting these in parking garages, and they didn't like to want to run power to it. So they said, well, make it battery operated. And then if you're going to make it battery operated, don't use those annoying alarm batteries that nobody knows where to buy. Use just a 9-volt battery. So we worked on 9-volt. And then other guys came back and said, look, we have a more sophisticated building. We wanted to record back to the panel that the on-site management knew there was water in the dry panel. So put dry contacts in it so it can be indicating and powered by the panel, by the alarm loop. So we did that. And then a third group, kind of the residential side of it, said, just let us plug it into the wall. So put 110 in it. So, the individual valve can be powered in the 3 different ways. And then, we also made some iteration changes when people came back and said, well, we don't mind if there's water in the low point drain, spring, summer, and fall. Put a thermostat on it so that you have the option to either tell me when there's water in it or wait until the ambient temperature is below 40 degrees. And, again, as we've evolved with the product line, we take the comments that contractors say in the field and say, we only want it to chirp and not blink, or we want it to blink and not chirp, or we actually have an accessory now that we introduced. We had a contractor said, look, can you just have the drum drip call me? So we put in we actually made an auto dialer for it. And you can record up to 25 messages per low point drain, and it'll just call you and tell you which one to come drain.
Wow. That's amazing. So you now have a low point drain that will say, what's the quantity of water before you would get a call like that?
So depending upon the variation, but you can have and freeze and break, because we did some testing. We froze and broke every low point valve that we made at over 2 ounces of water. So we hold just under 2 ounces of water.
Okay.
Which 2 ounces of water is the equivalent of about a couple of tablespoons, a couple of big tablespoons of water.
Right.
And as we all know, these things, they don't freeze and break. What happens is they freeze, they thaw, and then when they freeze again, the 2 ice plugs, fundamentally the expansion of it fights them, and that's what blows out the bottom valve. It breaks the reducer. It splits the seam on the pipe. It's that force of the 2 ice expanding, and that's where we discovered that we could make a very simple valve that would do all this.
So I'm while we're talking here, I'm scrolling through your website. It's got a lot of stuff on it. I'm looking at the M5400, which, I mean, to me, this looks like that might be the Cadillac.
It's evolutionary, yeah.
It's a self-contained heated environment for the low point drain.
Well, I mean, code tells you that they'd like you to put the low point drains in a heated environment. Our idea was, why don't we just bring the heated environment to the low point drain, but do it in such a way that it's efficient. So we made a highly insulated box, and to give you an example, like if it's 0 degrees out, it's 24/7 0 degrees. That's going to run on the equivalent of a 60-watt light bulb for about 20 minutes an hour.
Wow. So do you have like for the heater on this thing? It's obviously got a heater. It's going to maintain above 40 degrees. It's a lockable box. Like, are you able to put a lock on it to reduce the chance of getting tampering? Does the device have a tamper switch? So if it's opened?
Yes. So every unit is locked. It's a locked cabinet, locked and sealed. So it has a lock a door lock on the front of it, and then it has a magnetic seal around it to keep it tight, besides having an insulating seal. Mm-hmm. Then we offer, in the base model, it is certainly lockable, and it has the contacts on it to tell the panel, if the thing is full. You can get, we call it the hot monitor, and what that does is that will indicate if someone has left the door open or if the heater's running too much, or if the product has been touched or tampered with. That will set it into trouble alert. It'll blink and chirp and send a trouble alert to the panel. And where we have sold this has been in either areas that are prone to freezing and breaking issues, like high-rise buildings that have underground parking, the Freedom Tower in New York, the BWI Airport in Baltimore, or Atlanta Airport, where they are sometimes secure environments where they have low point drains, and they don't want people messing with them. And that's even the simple plate you see on our website, the Model 5200. I got to be honest with you, as we started doing research with this, and people said, well, you need to make it so that nobody can tamper with a low point drain. I said, well, why would somebody do that? And it was a stadium operator. He said, you can't imagine the amount of false trips we get on our dry system because people are drinking and they go in and turn the handles on the valves in the parking garages or in the stadium itself.
Yep.
And I'm like, why? And again, so that's actually been one of our most prolific markets, has been in public accessible areas that serve alcohol.
Yeah, people suck when they're drinking.
So we made, when we created, the idea was, could we just make a simple plate that would the top handle holds down the bottom valve handle. You got to close the top handle to move the plate out of the way to get to the bottom valve. Just a simple, simple plate.
Yeah, I mean, it seems, when you explain it like that, it seems like an easy process, but I mean, you guys are the guys that did it. That's
and I can't tell you the amount of times somebody looks at a product my family creates and they go, well, that's awfully simple. Like that, why didn't I think of that? And I'm like, well, even the vinyl wrap we put on all of our, just like the 5300A, just a run-of-the-mill double ball valve. It was more people coming back going, I don't like, as a contractor, it's a pain in the ass to remember to go back to put signage on all the low point drains. Mm-hmm. So our idea was, okay, we'll just make a vinyl tube that goes around it that has all your signage, so you never have to do that. Well, why didn't somebody pick that up? It just comes like that. Yeah. And to me, it's obvious. I listen to what the contractor says, and then I'm like, well, what about this or what about that? What do you think of this idea?
Yeah, that's not. I mean, when you're talking about things like that, even something as simple as isolation valves. When you're buying a 4-inch butterfly valve from Victaulic or somebody like that, they just automatically come with one of those Lamicoid signs that are required on all isolation valves. Right. Yeah, I mean, it's you got to buy it anyways. So why not buy it from one shop, right? Because that is probably one of the things that gets overlooked the most on sprinkler systems, is those little isolation valves. Inspectors test drain, airline in, things like that. The signage in the valve room is probably one of the most overlooked things. So
That's how you think about it, that's an entire section in 13 that people argue about constantly is what is on the signs. Because if you look at and then you're probably dealing with this on the engineering side, but certainly the fitters get frustrated. The requirement of what information is now required on signage is definitely needs to be updated. And I think that's one of the next big target areas of code that we're going to have to look at is we're demanding that contractors put information on these systems that either one, they don't have, they just physically don't have that information, or two, that information is so unnecessary or outdated that it doesn't make it's not pertinent to the system. And I think, but to get somebody to actually understand what's involved in changing the signage requirements, it could take 10 years of arguing and submitting revisions to get just simple signage changes. And I think that's I think is one of the next areas that needs to be addressed, because I think it's a burden put on the contractors of how all the signage is required. I think it's a little overkill. Right.
Yeah. Especially when you get like an AHJ out there that's, not passing an installation just because of the lack of an isolation valve, right?
Yeah.
Signage on an isolation valve.
Yeah, that's it. You almost have to have a truck that you bring to the job site that makes signs on demand.
Especially when you get thing I'm dealing with right now is the changing the Lamicoid signs that were in the specifications, but now my Lamicoid signs in the sprinkler spec don't match the fire alarm zones. So what they've done on their fire alarm graphic doesn't match the sprinkler. So it's not much, but who's going to get the new signs made up? Do I have to now go and get new signs made up, or are you going to get the signs made up or change your graphic that's on a piece of paper?
Right.
It's just one of those pains that you got to deal with as a contractor and, project manager essentially, right?
Yeah, and I personally, I think it's burdensome. So if a manufacturer like me can take the direct feedback from the contractor and go, hey, can you just put the signage directly onto your product? Save us that hassle, and then nobody can argue with it because they know we're doing it in a code compliant format. It just makes everybody's life easier.
So, again, off on another little tangent there. I like that though. It's good. Like I said, talking sprinkler. The purging vents, venting requirements were introduced, I believe it was either 2010 or 2013, requiring air vents on all wet systems as well. Let's talk about what you guys came up with as a solution. I think the reason they introduced this to the code was, number one, the corrosion, to prevent the corrosion of the sprinkler systems. And two, back in the day, the inspector's test valves were typically located at the farthest, highest point on a system. So there wasn't really a need to actually put it in the book. It was more of a common practice for people to install, call it an air vent, but it's an inspector's test. People like my old man and my grandfather were always, wait till, get all the air out of a system through the inspector's test when you're filling it. That was the thing that was always kind of hammered into me as a kid. I mean, not sitting around the kitchen table when I was 6 years old. Don't forget to bleed the air out of a system. Not going to say it never happened, but you know what I mean? Just because of the way installations are going, I think people are getting away from those kind of fundamental skills. So they had to kind of introduce it in the NFPA as a code requirement. So let's talk about, number one, why it's in the book, and number two, what you guys have done as a solution for the air venting.
Well, I mean, if you looked in prior history, say prior versions of code from the mid-2000s backwards, you looked at the word corrosion, it would always talk about the external influence on the pipe. And I think in the 90s, as systems, we have more and more systems online now because of the proliferation of systems in the kind of the 80s and 90s. And they started to realize that really it's more corrosion as an issue is internally related. And one of the primary reasons is the accumulated oxygen in the systems. And they put language in NFPA, in the annex in NFPA 2007, that specifically said putting the test connection at the most remote portion of the system causes the introduction of fresh oxygen into large parts of the system each time the alarm is tested and increases corrosion that will occur in the piping. And that was when they made the primary recommendation to stop using remote inspectors tests and started to allow the inspectors test to be directly installed on the supply riser. And I mean, fundamentally, sprinkler systems don't feel like a tsunami. They don't feel like a wave that all of the air is pushed forward. When they had remote inspectors tests, they were typically a vertical drop, like a 1-inch vertical drop leg down the farthest point of the system.
Yep.
And the minute water got down into that vertical drop leg, well, unfortunately, no air was coming out above that.
Right.
So, although that was one of the reasons why they said, look, you should vent out at the top fitting. Be what that fitting is. Is it the last head of the system? Don't tighten it. Is it an elbow? But whatever it is, at that high point in your system, as you're filling the system, that's where you vent. They put this language, and this the annex language about doing your best effort to get air taken out of a system has been repeated, in the last 5 editions. In probably 2013, as corrosion was becoming a much bigger topic in the early 2000s, with the building industry coming to the sprinkler industry and saying that we are now seeing the financial impact of corrosion. And I think that is we always knew there was corrosion. I mean, I don't know about you, but I got my ass whooped when I left the bike outside and my bike rusted. I mean, my father was pissed.
Yep.
So we always knew that if you introduce air, water, and steel together, you're going to get corrosion.
Yep.
It's common sense. But what our industry kind of changed over the last several years, and we're starting to put dollar signs to it. And there was a study done by VDS, which is the European equivalent of UL and FM. And they came back with this study on corrosion. They did a long-term corrosion study, and they came back and said, on wet systems, within a 25-year period of time from installation, 35% of all metallic pipe systems will have significant corrosion-related issue. And dry systems, 12.5-year period of time, 73% of metallic pipe systems will have significant corrosion. And when they introduced that, that was a massive alarm bell that we are seeing because of so many systems now. We have good empirical data. We are seeing significantly shorter time frames on the need for investigation for corrosion than what our long-term expectations had been. People used to always tout sprinkler systems as 50-year lifespan.
Yeah.
Well, that's not even remotely accurate now. So
no. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one of the biggest things about being, a small family-owned service contractor is I can go into these buildings that are 40, 50 years old and look at the systems that my grandfather and maybe my dad wasn't putting them in 50 years ago, but, my grandfather was and servicing them. Right.
Yeah.
I don't think my kids are going to be servicing any of the systems I put in anymore. And I think they're going to be replacing them.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see the lifetime of a sprinkler system be reduced, essentially based entirely on the changes in installation techniques.
And I understand that cost is king in many ways, and people said, well, we had an industry shift from Schedule 40 down to Schedule 10, and in some areas we're down in the Schedule 7 now.
Yep.
But I understand that, but you're passing the buck down the road by saying, well, I'm going to put in a pipe that's 75% thinner, but I'm going to have the same expectation of its longevity. That's just unrealistic.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that the lighter schedule of pipe it has had a very detrimental effect on it. I think we're doing better maintenance on systems. So, I'm one of those advocates that I wish more and more markets would adopt NFPA 25. I don't think that is people say they use it. People say that they reference it, but I don't think enough jurisdictions actually enforce it. And I think too many AHJs don't even understand it.
Right.
So I think, I wish NFPA 25 was a significantly wider, more aggressively enforced document, because I think it would help our cost. But specific to corrosion, when the building industry comes back and says, look, we're not seeing the lifespan that you told us, and we can put specific dollar amounts to that now. We can come back and say, due to corrosion, I had tenant-related problems. I had to have my tenant move out. I had retail store floor interruption. I'm losing money. I lost production time in my warehouse. I lost, they can now attribute cost numbers, specific cost numbers, to corroded pipe. And that is really what drove the industry in 2013. They started the discussions of moving the annex language of getting air out of the system from the annex to move it into the body. And the task group that was put together came back, and and I can tell you there was just tremendous discussion on how it would be worded. But when in Chapter 7, in 2016 is when it was introduced, they created the wording. It says on Chapter 7.1.5, a single air vent with a connection conforming to 816.6 shall be provided on each wet pipe sprinkler system utilizing metal pipe. So
that was the 2006. Did you say 2016?
Yeah. So 2016 was the first. And it went from, and I'm sure the people would laugh, when there's things in the annex, those are the shoulds. But when there's something brought over to the body of the document and it has the word shall, it takes on a whole different meaning.
That's right. Yep.
You shall do this. And they said, look, you have to have at least a single air vent in all wet pipe metallic systems. And in addition to that, that single air vent has to conform with they purposely made they put some ambiguity to give some relief to the engineer and to the contractor. They didn't say, look, you have to put it here. They said a vent required by 715 shall be located near a high point in the system to allow air to be removed from that portion of the system by one of three methods: a manual valve, just a half-inch size, an automatic air vent, or other approved means. So the two big shalls, in my opinion, are you shall have a single air vent and you shall put it near a high point. I can't stress enough that the word near, because I've had contractors come back and say, well, I can't physically get to the highest point of the system. It's inaccessible. I said, that's why it says near a high point, to give you some relief on where you put it. So ultimately, the goal was, if we can do everything we can to get air out of the system, we know you can't get all the air out. And I'll be like, on not speaking against myself here, but my family makes a lot of the pressure relief valves for systems. As you guys know, we have the model 1011. Every version of valves that we make has a relief valve now. And in 2010, they required pressure relief valves on every wet system. So you have to have a pressure relief valve now on all systems. And we know there is a need, because of our work with the pressure relief valves, there is a need for a certain amount of air in a system to handle thermal expansion. So we know it's not practical, nor is it physically possible to get all of the air out of a system. And because of the thermal expansion, we need some of that air in there. We just want people to take their best effort to get the air out of the system.
Right. So again, the other thing, it's inaccessible. There's nothing saying you can't pipe that valve down to be an accessible location either. If you want to have it at the most, you can still pipe it. Much like an inspector's test, put the valve at 5 feet. You can do the same for your air vent as well.
As long as you're taking it off of the high line, and I would say that the reliance of using it as the inspector's test, the problems that I personally have with that, like, to me, I understand that the inspector test could be a viable air vent. It's just not practical, because it would either require a second valve or constant attention, because the minute the vertical leg that is fed from the top of the line gets water in it, it's no longer venting out any air. So someone has to constantly be dealing with burping the system.
Right.
So that's, I mean, there is, I mean, I understand it that an inspector's test in an ideal world taken off as a gooseneck off the top of a highline pipe may be good, but you get into some issues where most language for the inspector's test says that that valve is to be at a manual height. So unless the person has fed that line from the highest, near the highest point in the system, and they've just taken it off from a lower branch, you're not going to get any air out of that system. Nor if that inspector's test has any water on top of it, are you going to get any air out of it? And then you start talking about, well, oftentimes the inspector's test is, say it's in a multi-story environment, it's put on the sectional floor control. Well, it's oftentimes put on the bottom of a horizontal line, so it's never going to get any air out of it. And if you put the language of an inspector's test as a viable air vent, one of your other biggest problems is, what if you do it when the person says, well, my inspector's test is located at the supply riser. I'm counting that as my air vent. Well, then it's totally worthless, because the minute the supply riser gets water in it, it's no longer going to be able to vent any air out of it. So my biggest concern by people saying, well, the remote inspector's test is people can interpret that wrong, and it can be used. We're basically back to square one, where we're back thinking that that the inspector's test is a viable option, and really, unless there's specific attention to how that valve has access to the system, it's really just not an effective air vent.
Right. Okay. Well, yeah, that's all good points. So, how does the automatic purge and vent that you guys have available work?
Yeah.
What are the fundamental principles on it? The not the manual, the remote. I'm just looking for the part number right now here.
The 7900 AAV. Yeah.
Yes, that one. What's the underlying principles on how it works? If you're not giving away any kind of trade secrets, I'm assuming this thing's patented. This is yours.
It is. Well, I mean, it breaks into a couple of different things. And you touched on some of them, but first and foremost, it incorporates an isolation valve so that the automatic air vents can be isolated away from the system. I think that's a necessary requirement, especially if a fitter's going to be, pumping up a system for an integrity test. So that's something we need to address. So, we incorporated a shutoff valve. It incorporates all the automatic air vents have to have strainers, and we chose to go with, versus the other products on the market that use Y strainers. It's more like I was worried about my father haunting me. He hated Y strainers. He always felt they clogged. So because the flow path through them. So we went with a barrel strainer. So the whole body of our valve is one big strainer. And then we added a unique feature that kind of no one else has, that really goes back to, if you talked about your grandfather and your father, they used to have these things called end of line testers.
Yes.
And when you did large systems, it was common practice to have this little device called an end of line tester that you vented out upon initially filling the system, and then when you got water up at that, you redirected that product. It literally had a little boss on it, a little wrench boss on it. You turn the wrench boss from the bottom, where it was venting out, to the top, and that's where you put your sprinkler head. Yep. I always thought that was a brilliant idea. So we brought back that concept. We added a garden hose cap and chained ball valve to the bottom of our air vent, so that we could do a rapid air purge of the system. But the other thing was, again, I spend just a disproportionate part of my life reading NFPA 25. And my thought was, if you put a strainer on a system, NFPA 25 requires that you actually have the ability to flush and clean the strainer. Well, my idea was, why not, if we have this garden hose cap and chain ball valve built into our air vent, why don't we just make it so that it will completely flush out the strainer? So that was really why we added that second valve. So you could clean the strainer easily and also do a rapid air purge. We had another contractor in Connecticut called, and he gave us something that was unintended. He said they had an issue where they were draining large distribution warehouses, and they were pulling vacuums on a system that was dislodging couplings. And I think all the fitters in the field would chuckle when they know that happens. And then invariably you send up you refill the system and you find the little drip leak, and you find that the coupling's dislodged. Somebody goes up there with a rubber mallet and beats the hell out of the coupling to reseat it. So we discovered that these air vents can be very large vacuum breakers. So you can both fill a system significantly faster because you're pushing all the air out, but you can also drain a system significantly faster because of the vacuum breaking concept.
Okay.
So then, that was just the bottom valve of our air vent. Then we looked at the air vent itself, like what is the device that's getting the air out? And we had the luxury of talking to numerous contractors around the country who had some limited experience as these were evolving with other products. And we said, they said, well, we have to be worried about these things dripping because they all drip. And I said, well, instead of coming up with a methodology to handle dripping, why don't we just make an air vent that doesn't drip? So what we did is we went with just a completely different architecture of design in an air vent than what all of the other competitors are using. We went with a conical shape that has a sealed chamber in it, and it has one large float assembly that's sealed, so none of our parts are kind of exposed, because I was always worried about corrosion on the inside of the air vent because that's a wet environment. It's an air wet environment. And I'm like, well, why would, we need to make precautions. So let's make everything sealed in here. So what happens is the cone has got this little device at the bottom called the bubble breaker. And the idea is that breaks the air that's exhausting it. There's little perforations that are on the other side of the strainer screen. And then that whole assembly is a sealed chamber. And then as that float rises up, it pushes up on a lever that seals the end of our unit shut. So as you get buoyancy on the float, it pushes up on a cam, and that cam has like a plunger which pushes against the outlet of our product to seal it closed. But the whole conical shape, if there was, the idea is the shape of the device, you have a significantly greater area at the bottom than you do at the top. As that float rises, it seals up the whole chamber itself.
Okay.
So
you're essentially bringing more water, number one, into the device, but you're also sealing the outside oxygen. Well, essentially sealing the device itself, protecting itself.
Exactly. We're making a trap chamber in the middle of it.
Yep.
So,
okay.
We looked at the code. I mean, and code is very specific here. Code says, you have to have a single air vent. There's some underlying things the code doesn't say. Like the code is, I joke with people, there's, what's not required in a system. Well, you know what? There is no requirement for an air valve, for an air vent or an air release valve to have any form of drainage piping on it. That's not required in any way, shape, or form.
Yep.
There's no requirement to for the engineer to say a specific distance from the floor. That's where it doesn't say put it at the highest point. It says put it near a high point.
Right.
There's no requirement whatsoever to do it. And this is the one that I have to really explain to people. There's no requirement to do a displacement calculation. You are not required to verify that you have gotten all of the air out of the system. You're not required. I've had guys come back and say, "Well, how much air am I getting out of this?" Well, that literally is incalculable because I don't know what the air volume is of the alarm valve that's at the beginning of the system and all throughout the piping network.
Yep. But you're getting it all out. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
You're getting more out than you did without it.
And again, if you go back to the intent, the simplicity of it, a half-inch, codes in Chapter 8 says you can just have a half-inch ball valve. I mean, that's why we introduced the model 7910, which is just our little ball valve air vent, the manual one. But, if I, jump to that one just as a reference point, we looked at it and said, okay, code number 1 here says I can just have a half-inch ball valve. And we used my own building as an example. My inbound water supply is at the front of the building. And that little half-inch valve would be, on the other side of the building. So I'd be running, 20,000 square feet of space running from I turn the water line on. So what we did is we put a little Teflon check into the ball valve on the inside of it, with the idea that as the air is coming out, the Teflon ball will bounce around inside, which will release the air out. But then once water comes up, it will push the Teflon ball up into the ball valve, sealing it closed, so I don't waste any water.
Okay.
So it was literally just, well, why would I want to inconvenience two contractors, one guy turning the water on and the other guy waiting for water to hit him in the face, when I could just make a little Teflon check that seals at the other end, and make it. And that's what the minimum of the code was. Hey, you just need a 1/2-inch valve. You don't need all these complex systems that everyone's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And then,
so go ahead.
Well, when we introduced these two versions, kind of the manual one, which it's fundamentally semi-automatic, and the automatic one, we went to contractors and we said, okay, what do you like? We made the product based off everything you guys told us that you wanted, but that's the product demand. We need to know from the field, what does the field need? And the field were the guys that kind of gave us the two evolutionary products. The one's called the 7950 ILV. It's an inline air vent, and the other one's called the 7930 ECA end cap automatic air vent.
Okay.
And that literally came directly from design engineers who came and said on the first one, the inline one, we need flexibility of installation. We don't know where exactly we're going to locate it. We need it to be simple to install. We want to be able to pull it out of the box with just put two couplings on it and walk away. And we may put it, down in the system a little bit on a cross main that we are counting that as high enough, or we may just put an end cap on it and count it as good, or we may put it on the sectional floor control valve.
Right.
But the goal there was we looked at how you get air out of a boiler system, and they make expansion loops and things like that. And we said, well, we could minimize that and go to, what if we, if the product's like 2-inch on the inlet and the outlet, it's kind of 3-inch in the middle of it. We make an air trap chamber in the product. And that has given a lot of contractors flexibility to put these things wherever they want. And I can say probably the most is that people say, look, we the sprinkler industry own the first few feet of, in the stairwells, we have about a 2-foot square space. That's all us.
Yep.
And we have guys coming back and say, look, I want you to build my air vent into the sectional floor control. I said, well, that's typically not going to be the highest point. They said, no, we get that. We'll deal with that at the end of the system, but I don't want any air getting past it once the system's full. So that's where that has been a very popular unit. And then a very large contractor came to us and said, we like the automatic air vent. It's certainly the smallest, most purpose-built on the market, but we do ESFR systems. You have to get this below 7 inches in height, because from the top of the pipe to the bottom of the roof deck. And the guy literally, there's 5 of us in the room, and he said, I don't care how you do it, Jim. Figure it out. Get it below 7 inches. So then I said, okay, why don't we build an air vent into an end cap? And if we do that, we got the height down to 4 7/8 inches.
Yeah.
And I would love to take credit for creating all these things, but 9 times out of 10, it's multiple fitters and engineers and guys in the field. We're all sitting down, and just the way my dad created Test and Drain, he was sitting there with a group of guys. And a lot of it's on a beer napkin.
Wait a second. You're talking these fitters met and drank together to figure out these ideas? That doesn't sound like sprinkler.
we have a really good line item budget for all that.
Yeah, you have to in this industry. Yeah. It's a very, very thirsty bunch.
So, my hope was that we looked at what was available in the market and we said, we need to simplify this, because if we can make it simple, then people will be more prone to doing it. I won't get resistance on using the products. People will be like, yeah, it's not an expense burden. It's not an installation burden. I will put it in. I will do my best to get the air out. That makes it a more probable installation.
Okay. So now I'm again scrolling through your website. You guys have a lot of innovative stuff on this website.
Thanks.
I want to ask about Corroe Insight.
Core
Am I
Insight.
saying
Yeah.
Core Insight? Okay, yeah. what what does this item do? What's the purpose of it, and how does it benefit?
Core Insight came out of a very funny building operator talk, a facility manager. We
Mhm.
were out talking about collect and drain, and he got it. I mean, he was dealing with a frozen and broken drum drip and the pain of that. And I was talking to them about, we make collect and drain, we made this. He says, okay, I get that. He said, but in one of our other buildings, we have pinhole leaks due, and you said, yeah, due to corrosion, I get that. And he goes, I wish you guys would figure out some way to tell me about a pinhole leak right before I actually get the pinhole leak so I can move the stuff out of the way. And I was like, that's actually a great idea. Could we make a device that we could put onto the system that would tell someone you're about to get pinhole leaks before you actually get the pinhole leak? And so what the Core Insight, it's a really simple, it's a hollow plug. The plug itself is 1.5 inches. It's a sight glass plug, and we make it both like with a groove already assembled onto a piece of pipe, or you can just put it onto. We make it with a mechanical T connection, or you can just put it wherever you want.
Yep.
What we do is the plug on the inside, the part that's exposed to the system, it's just regular standard steel, but we machine it out to be hollow, and it's got a wall thickness of 0.040. So it's 1/3 the thickness of Schedule 10 pipe. And then on the outside, the pipe side, the sight glass, it's got this little white glass. Mm-hmm. And what happens is when the exposed part of the steel corrodes away, because as I said, it's hollow, it then changes the sight glass to bright orange on the outside of the pipe, that glass.
Okay.
So the goal here was to give a visual indication on the outside of the pipe that you have just lost 1/3 of the wall thickness of your pipe. So when we talked to the guys at Wheatland, they said if you can find out when that first 1/3 of the wall thickness of the pipe, then you can salvage the pipe. But if you get down to half of the wall thickness of the pipe, you're going to get pinhole leaks. Mm-hmm. So the whole goal was make a very cost-effective, like that was the other thing. When I looked at other corrosion detecting devices, they either required wiring or they were coupons. And when I asked contractors, I said, well, when you put in a coupon test kit, what do you do? And they said, well, we monitor it, and then we send the coupon out for testing, and that costs, hundreds of dollars. And then we get back a high school science report.
Yep.
And I'm like, well, really, all you really care is yes or no. I have a problem or I don't. He's like, yeah, pretty much. I was like, okay, well, that to me sounds like a simple sight glass. Yes, I have a problem. No, I don't.
Yep.
So that's the idea of it.
So your recommended locations here on the website show the main coming into the building, floor control valves, branch lines, and the end of the branch lines. You also have an orientation layout here. It's not to be installed on the top or the bottom of the systems. What's the difference between putting it on the angle as shown in the orientation or putting it on the top or the bottom?
So it's primarily, so if I'm in a wet system, I just don't want to be at 12 o'clock because then I would be an air gap. That wouldn't be a fair test. I want to be in the sidewall of the pipe so that some surface area of the plug is exposed to the water of the system as well as any accumulated air that the air vent hasn't gotten out. So I want to be at that 1 or 2 o'clock position on the sidewall of the pipe.
Okay.
And then on the dry system, it's the exact opposite. I don't want to be at 6 o'clock because all I'll be is a water collector or a debris collector in the system. I want to be at 4 or 5 o'clock because that's where any accumulated moisture is sitting against the sidewall of the pipe.
Right. Yep.
And really, the best place to put these things, we tell everybody, is beginning of the system is where you're going to find your most oxygen rich, but you want it to, the goal with this was the majority of corrosion is related to oxygenation, but there's also the McHugh influenced corrosion. So the goal was say, look, give me a product that replicates steel, that it's the same steel we use in the pipe, make it so that I can easily locate it. I don't need to pull wires to it. I don't need to make anything that needs to be removed and sent away. Just give it to me on the pipe. Then I can physically take building owner over to it and go, this thing turned orange. You're about to have issues.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about, do we want to bring in some form of service? Do you want, let's do a further investigation. Maybe we want to look at installing a dry air pack on this system. Maybe we want to look at installing a nitrogen system, but give a contractor physical proof. Because I think that's one of the things contractors miss. Everybody specs a nitrogen system, but then the guy goes, well, that's a lot of money. I don't know if I'm going to have a problem. But they need something physical to show the building owner, hey, yeah, you do have a problem.
Right. Yeah. Not just the service calls from the past year, because we've had a couple situations where I've been recommending for 4 or 5 years that they replace the system, the piping in a dry system that's in an attic. So
Yeah.
it's just time. They're on us. The system's only 25 years old, and it's not anything about the installation. It's just it's time. It's that pipe's time. The dry systems using the skid 10 pipe, which is what everybody wants to go for the most cost effective way, right? That's the aspect of the industry that's cutthroat, is everybody wants to be the cheapest. But I mean, yeah, I dealt with it. I dealt with dealing with building owners that didn't want to put the money into fixing the system, and then would be upset when we had to come at 3 a.m. and fix the freeze up.
And we looked at this, and God bless that facility manager, the one that kind of inspired this idea. I said, we need to make this just so insignificant or so inexpensive that somebody wouldn't have a problem putting. We don't want them on every floor. That's overkill. I mean, you get a 5-story building, you're going to put one at the inlet and maybe one on floor 3. Just 1 or 2 of these things around to give you some form of visual indication that you have an issue, and then address it from that point forward. Catch it early before you get damage.
Now, is it just the plug that we're buying, or do you sell the whole mechanical tee? Is it a unit?
Yeah, so you can buy it in 3 ways. You can buy it fully assembled or unassembled. So we have some guys that want the plugs, and actually we will put the contractor's name and contact information on the plugs for them. Really? We'll put their logos and all that. So we do offer custom plug, the kind of the cap design. We have some guys that want to buy it already assembled onto the pipe spool. They kind of want to pick it up out of the box, put 2 couplings on it, and walk away.
Yep.
And then we have a lot of contractors, service and repair ITM companies that do, and I don't know if you've seen this up in Canada, but we've seen an explosion of in the United States, more and more companies doing internal pipe inspection. And that group has been good for us, where they are targeting, they're saying, look, we're going to come in, we're going to do an internal pipe inspection, and then we're going to put a bunch of these remote tests on your system. And, they're taking over this idea of the monitoring system. So they buy the mechanical T version. They like that because they pop holes in the pipe, take the coupon out, they measure the coupon. That gives them a kind of a control of the, say you have an older system, guys will come back and say, well, I have an older system, this favors new. I said, no, I understand. If you have an older system, just take the coupon out, you use the mechanical teeth to install, mic it, and then deduct that from the 0.040, and you'll know where your wall thickness is.
Right. Yep.
So
go
ahead.
That's so just explain that process one more time for us here. So when I get the Crow Insight, I'm using, when I drill the hole for the mechanical tee, I'm using that same the coupon from that hole in the. Okay, so it's not. While you were explaining that, I was kind of thinking, I'm getting a piece of pipe that you order skid 10, skid 40, et cetera, and then I'm getting a new piece of pipe on an older system, but I'm using the actual piping that's there, which is going to give me a quicker identification. So it doesn't matter if I've got a system that's 10, 12 years old. I install this system, and it's going to tell me what that piping is doing and how fast it's corroding.
There's actually a little hole drilled in the side of the Core Insight plug for you to wire tie on the coupon to it, so that it is physically attached. So, a person down the line could come back and go, here was the, and every one of them is dated. They're stamp dated on the plate. So you could say, look, on this date, this thing was put in. Here's the coupon that was taken out to put it in. And this was the date. this was the wall thickness, and now here's what this is, so that you can compare the two of them.
Right. That's interesting. That's
And I think the overlying thing we tried to do here, my brother and I both looked at this and said, we need to make this so easy and so simple that people will actually do it. We can't require someone to put in a big convoluted device with lots of wires and bells and whistles, because then they won't do it.
That's right. Yeah.
We need to make it, a lot more installation friendly. And I mean that, if anything, my father's, his legacy to our family is, whatever you do it from the eyes of the fitter. Do it from the eyes of the field, because they're going to have to take it apart. They're going to have to fix it. Not to jump back to the test and drains, but this is and there's a little video online. I think you hear me doing it. When my dad designed test and drain valves, he was very adamant that somebody in the field be able to fix them in the middle of the night without any parts.
Right.
So the valves are actually the internal parts, and every valve built today, all the parts of today will fit every valve backwards. So we've kept symmetry in all of our engineering. But if you had a valve that had an issue, you could drain the system down, open up the end adapter, pull this first seat out, pull the ball out, pull the damaged seat out, take the first seat, flip it, put it back in, put the ball back in, and put the damaged seat in upside down, and you just rebuilt the valve. I mean, everything we design from how is a fitter going to be 5, 10, 15, and 20 years? How is he going to be interacting with our product?
Right.
And I think that's an issue. I mean, when you're a family-owned business that's making everything, it's got your name on it. It's got, it's got our reputation behind it, and we're making it domestically. We're not importing from one company and then 6 months later changing to another company or buying it. This is my family name on this product. We pride ourselves in how we make this product, all of our different product lines.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, so I'm just going through your distribution. You guys are very, very much available throughout the USA. Available at Ferguson Fire and Fabrication, Core & Main, Viking, Croker. And then in Canada, you guys are available at Linkar, which is a big sprinkler supplier around here, as well as Viking Supply Net. Before we get off the call here, we're punching on, I think, close to an hour, hour and a half here. What else do you guys have coming out here soon? What innovative products are you guys going to be launching soon, or are you keeping that stuff kind of close to the chest today?
No, we're somewhat open book, because we typically ask contractors for feedback. So we tend to do our design by committee, and the committee tends to be, family members here as well as guys in the field coming in and going, hey, I wish you guys would make blank.
Right.
We've seen evolution in our riser pack product line, these pre-assembled risers and sectional floor controls. We introduced that back in the early 2000s, late 90s. We did that. And we're still the largest. We make all the different we make them code compliant. We make 13R, 13D, and 13 commercial of that product line. So that's an always evolving product line, from contractors asking us, hey, can you pre-assemble it with a backflow preventer? Can you make it with plastic adapter? So that's one of the issues. And then a new product line that is coming out is called, we're well known for test and drain. Mm-hmm. We have a new product line called Test and Save. There are jurisdictions, it's in the U.S. I don't know that it's come up to Canada yet, and I pray it doesn't for you guys, that they're declaring sprinkler water a biotoxic hazard, and they are preventing the contractor from exhausting the sprinkler water. You're not going to be allowed to drain the sprinkler water to the sanitary, the sewer, or to grade. You're going to have to capture the sprinkler water at the discharge of the sprinkler water and either filter it or somehow chemically treat it back to almost potable. And California, Oregon, and Colorado have laws on the books now preventing this.
Wow.
So we had a contractor called, and he's like, okay, you guys are the creative family at stuff like this. So we said, well, we make Test and Drain. Why don't we make a product called Test and Save? And what Test and Save does is it puts a cabinet, and it puts an interruption in your supply and your drain connection, so that look, we understand in a fire event you're going to flow water, but in a service ITM mode where this is what they're complaining about, you can't ever get rid of the sprinkler water. What it would do is it would redirect the flow out of the drain back into supply, and it would kind of turn your building into one big drain loop, like a boiler system.
Yeah.
So it's got a pump and tank system, and then it can get paired with a larger storage tank if necessary, so that once the water's in your system, it's in there forever. You can filter it if you want. You can add treatment to the water if you want. But it's in response to these just insane municipal requirements that fitters are going to get stuck with soon about treating or storing sprinkler water.
Interesting. So I've heard things about the I've heard horror stories in California where you go to do a 2-inch drain test, and you better bring a water storage truck with you because you're pumping it into the tanks.
Yep.
We haven't had. I've had one municipality start to talk about it, but I haven't heard yet if it's going to be 100% a go or not. There's discussions, but until the first fine gets laid, it's not law, essentially, is the way right? You can choose all the bylaws you want, but until you lay that first fine for somebody to do it, it's not official, right?
I was out on the West Coast and sat through a little training on. There was a company that introduced a filter vacuum system that you would hook up your 2-inch or larger hose connections when you're doing any form of drain down on a system. You'd hook it into this device, and for all intents and purposes, it was a shop vac on steroids, and it had this very large capacity filter cartridge on it, and it was $10,000 for the machine and $3,000 for the filter cartridge, one use only.
I do remember that. I saw that. I saw that device at the I believe it was the NFSA conference in Las Vegas.
Yep.
2-3 years ago. I think is when
they're getting traction on that.
Yeah, I mean, when I was walking around with one of the guys that I know from up here in Canada, and I looked at him, my eyes just kind of went, "Are you you're filtering sprinkler water? You're not supposed to drink it. It's
no, you know what? I can tell you here, it tastes terrible because when we moved into one of our buildings here in the 90s, was doing some work on our building physically, and as you'd imagine, if you're a mechanical family, you're going to do a lot of your own work. Yep. I actually cross-connected by mistake the sprinkler system into the same water line that actually fed our kitchen.
Ah, boy.
And for the first 2 weeks, I thought we had the world's worst water quality. And it wasn't until I went out and saw what I had done, and I said, "Oh, well, okay, that one's on me." So I can tell you, sprinkler water tastes terrible.
Yeah, I've I mean, if that's not an ad on using qualified personnel, I don't know. I don't know exactly. What is. Jim, thanks for coming on the Fire Sprinkler Podcast. Thanks for talking about all this stuff. How does somebody get a hold of you if they want to say introduce a product to you, recommend a product to you, or just reach out as far as finding distribution, things like that?
Well, sure. So we have a couple things. I mean, I highly recommend if anyone gets the opportunity, please visit our website is agfmanufacturing.com, or any of the product lines that I talked about, like Test and Drain is testanddrain.com or testandsave.com or collectanddrain.com. All of our product lines actually have dedicated sub-sites. So you can that's one. Our main phone number is 610-240-4900. I highly recommend people call it. We have a pretty funny voicemail music we get that we talk about. And then email, it's our name. So like mine is J McHugh, MCHUGH. So J McHugh at testanddrain.com is my email. And I would say if you call us, there's high probability you're going to get a family member. We pride ourselves on, my brothers and I, we deal with all the technical calls. So
yep, awesome. And social media, what do you guys have for social media?
Yeah, as you'd expect, AGF's got, I know we've got a presence on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn. We're trying to put, I think the social media side of us tends to be the funnier stuff.
Yep.
We tend to put some comical things up there. I think Ellen Davis, our director of marketing, has fun. Even some of the stuff when I've seen our posts on Instagram, some of them are hilarious. We go out of our way to look for stuff like that.
Awesome, Jim. Thanks for coming on today.
Chris, if I appreciate this, just talking to you guys, and I don't know in your readership or your listenership, I don't know if that's the right word.
Yep.
I know that CASA, the Canadian Automatic Sprinkler Association, has an upcoming meeting in Nashville,
Yep.
and we will be there as well in Nashville at the Omni. So I don't know if there's a chance that any of your Canadian listeners can stop by and introduce themselves. I would really like to meet them, just because it's an area which I've been to Canada many times. I was just in Vancouver for a national meeting, and it was the first time I'd been to Vancouver, and that was a spectacular city. Really great time there.
I haven't been out that way. I'm southwestern Ontario, so Canada's a big, beautiful country. I've been to Banff a couple times. Toronto's like the big city in Canada, but it's much like Vancouver, right? Just a big sprawling city.
So there is in my collection of products. My collection tends to favor what my family makes, as you'd imagine. Mm-hmm. But I have very proudly displayed our Windsor, Ontario test and drains.
Ontario test and drains.
Yes, we manufactured test and drains for a period of time. We did dual production. We did a production down here at our facilities in the United States, but then my father, for several years, we actually made some test and drains in Windsor, Ontario for a brief period.
Well, Windsor's like my neck of the woods. The sprinkler company that I work for, family owned and operated Walls Can Sprinklers. We do a lot of work in Windsor, Ontario, and I live, where I live is kind of around the lake, but I'm an hour and a half away from Windsor.
Yeah, and we've always had a close affiliation with the Canadian market. But please, if anyone comes down for for the National Fire Sprinkler or the North American Fire Sprinkler Show in Nashville,
yep.
And they're from the Canadian market, I'd really like to meet more.
What's your booth number there if you want to give a shout out for the Nashville, the NFSA conference in Nashville? What are the dates on that too? I've got it sitting around here, but I can't think of it off the top of my head.
You're going to kill me, but if I remember right, it is in, I think it's May?
Yeah, it's in May. I believe it's the 14th to the 18th.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yep. So we are, it's 14th to the 18th in Nashville, and we are booth 316 to 318. You'll have, I think you'll have a variety of my family members. We'll all be down for that.
Okay. Yeah, I'll be at booth 330. So we'll link up when we get there, and it's one thing to talk on the phone, but it's another thing to shake a guy's hand.
Yeah, it's even better to have beers when the winner in the hand.
I don't hate that idea either.
Yeah.
Awesome.
That's good.
Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Chris. Have a great day.